Hey, Paul here. I'm really excited about what we can do with Canvas Learning Management System and Zapier, because it means we can connect our Canvas account with so many other things, and really your imagination is the only limit here. So I'd like to walk you through the example of setting up a Zap for when students submit assignments and you want to track that data somewhere and do something with it. So this assumes you've already followed some basic setup to authenticate your Canvas account, set up the webhook in Canvas Data Services. Some instructions have been included for that. So what we need to do to get started is to set up the trigger. And we're looking for the trigger event of new submissions. And I've just named, I think it's good practice to name your Zap here. So I've just called this a Canvas Assignments to, well, anything. You could call it Canvas Assignments to Spreadsheet or whatever you want to do with that assignment data. Let's keep moving through. I'll move my head out of the way. There we go. So we're just going to jump straight down here to test trigger. So follow the little setup instructions here and then go into Canvas and submit an assignment as if you were a student, and we'll see what happens. So here's our little test, and we've received an assignment. It's just a test one, and this looks a little bit like gobbledygook, but this is very important data that we actually can use throughout the rest of our actions in Zapier. So I'm going to continue, and now we need to add an action, something to do with this data. For this simple example, I'm going to use Google Sheets. And again, you'll need to just follow the steps to authenticate your account with Google Sheets, or you could use Microsoft Excel or any other tool. And the action event is that we want to create a spreadsheet row. So when a new assignment submission comes through, it'll make a new row in the spreadsheet for each one. Continue. We need to choose our account that we're going to use. Just using my account here. I've already authenticated this. If you haven't, you'll just need to click a thing and the box will pop up and you can just sign it in. And then choose the location of your spreadsheet. So I've already got my spreadsheet already up and running and ready to go. It's called Canvas Assignments Test, and it's just saved in my Google Drive. And go there. And you can just search. So I'm just going to type in Canvas Assignments Test. And this has only got one worksheet. It's called Sheet 1. Maybe you give it a better name than that. If there's more than one sheet, you can select other sheets as well. And now you'll see it's populated here with all of the same headings or columns that I've created in my spreadsheet. Let's have a look. There it is. So now we want to figure out what data to put in these columns so that each time there's a submission, the right stuff comes across. So firstly, student, that's the student's name. The data that came in through the trigger, we usually refer to that as a payload. It's a whole bunch of formatted data that we can use and really use it in quite creative and interesting ways. And it's actually a variable, so it'll be different every time the trigger fires, but it's structured in the same way. So every time it says student name, it'll have the name of that student who submitted the assessment. So here we have in our payload of data, we can see here one called details username, and it's just test student. When we click that, you'll see it's actually entered that in to the field here. So that means that that student's name that submitted the assessment will pop into that column in the spreadsheet. We can do the same thing with the course number. Sometimes though, there's a lot of data that does come across, so we need to sift through it. So I think if we just use the search, here in the search bar, we're going to type in ID, and we're going to look for the course ID. There it is. Details course ID. I probably could have typed it in like this, course ID, and that might have sorted it out a little bit easier. So when we click that one, it's going to enter that variable in there. So every time it brings it across, it'll get the relevant course ID. Assignment ID, or assignment number. So I'll just type in assignment or assign, and there it is, details, assignment ID. So I'll click that one, and then it's adding that in there. Do the same with the course name. Well, here it is up the top, Paul's Testing Ground. In this field here, I thought it might be cool to include a link to preview the assignment, so you can just get a quick look at what the assessment was that was submitted. And the payload of data actually sends us across a link to the assignment, a preview one. So if I just type in URL, this one here, details preview URL. You can put any of this data across. And here's a little fundamental of Zapier where you can actually customize the types of data that you use and mix it with hard-coded values and the variables that come through. So for example, you might remember when you are marking an assignment, you often use SpeedGrader. And so let's take a look at how you might actually use that. Here's our students' marks. Now normally you'd follow this whole process through and go to SpeedGrader. But this is the interesting thing here, is the URL. Now what you might notice in URLs is you can actually see the IDs in there. So we've got course ID 186, that's important to note. Assignment ID 1133 and student ID 676. So all the other stuff in this URL will remain the same, but these little IDs will change. And depending on which one you're looking at, it will bring up different students and different submissions. Probably the only other difference would be your hosting will be different than ours. So I'm going to copy this and use it as kind of like a template to set up our SpeedGrader link, because it's not sending us across a SpeedGrader link. It doesn't know that. So we have to create it ourselves. So I'm going to paste that in there. But what I need to do is I need to change this. So I'm going to get the course ID from the variable data. We need this one here. So the assignment ID is different for every assignment that's submitted. So we're going to delete that. You just have to sift through the data and find it. Okay, so this, in this case, it's user ID. We'll pop that in there. So now we can see our URL is being constructed from the variables. Now I know this is a little bit fiddly and perhaps a little daunting for some, but once it's set up, you don't need to worry about it again. And just remember, you can include all sorts of stuff. You could even say, here is the link to the student submission in SpeedGrader. Maybe you wouldn't do that in a spreadsheet, but I just wanted to illustrate the example. Okay, let's continue with the setup. Perhaps you want to keep your setup even simpler than this. We're going to test it. Test and review. And what we're looking for is this nice, satisfying green tick that says success. Aha, very good. A test was successful. So let's go and check out our spreadsheet and see what's happened. There it is. Whoops. It's inherited the formatting from the heading. Perhaps you might want to set that up a little bit differently to what I've done. I've obviously done something silly with my spreadsheet, but once we change the formatting, I'm sure it'll go back to normal. So I'll just fix that up a little bit. There we go. So there we can see our test student, the course ID, assignment number, the course name, a link to preview the assignment, which is handy. Okay, we get a quick preview of the assignment. There's not much there. And we also have a link to SpeedGrader. Now, I don't know why Excel hasn't turned that into a URL. Maybe because I included all that extra stuff in there. Probably if I just have it like that, yeah, there we go. Now that's a link that we can click and it'll take us to the SpeedGrader for that submission. There you go. So it'll take a little bit of tinkering, but once it's set up, every time someone submits something, automatically, without thinking, it'll just keep adding a new row for each submission. If you've got a busy RTO, this spreadsheet's going to fill up pretty quickly, but that's okay. Here's some other things you might want to consider as well. Remember, we can stack these actions, and we can use the data from one action to the next one, which is really exciting. So you could just turn on your Zap here and it's ready to go, or you can add something else. What if you used Slack and you wanted to have a special channel in Slack that made an announcement to all of the assessors that said, hey, a test student has submitted their assignment. Here's a link to the Google Sheet and here's a link to the speed grader. You can do the same stuff there too. Or you might even send the student back an email that says, hey, we got your submission. We'll be, what's our turnaround time? 10 days, we're marking the assignment or something like that. And you could just keep going with this. You can see there's a lot of power there. But of course, as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. And that means, we are pulling private student data out of Canvas. And this is all totally secured and private and everything. But when you start sending it off to this app and that app, you just need to be mindful of what you're doing with that data and where you're sending it. So don't go too crazy, but certainly there are some really useful and powerful use cases to improve and streamline business operations here. But let's just do a quick Slack example because I think that's a fun way of doing it. So we choose Slack as our action. And the event we want to choose is to send a channel message. The account, just choose your account that you want to use. I've already authenticated mine. And I've got a channel in there for assignments. And so here's where you can start inserting data that you've brought in from either the trigger and now also from the spreadsheet. So let's just keep this really simple, and you can say, hey, assessors, guess what? Let's get a little bit fancy here. Test student, or the name of the person, has just submitted an assignment. You can even use emojis. We use that hooray emoji. How about this? Go forth and assess it. And we can include a link to SpeedGrader. I think because we've already constructed it here, there we go, straight from the data's already been put together. Send as a bot. I think that's a good idea. Otherwise, it looks like it's coming from you, and you can call this your My RTO bot. And you can put an icon in there if you want. We won't include a link to the Zap. Don't know why you do that. You can schedule it, you can add files, you can do all sorts of other stuff. And let's continue and we'll do a test and see what happens. Test and review. Let's have a look. Here we go. My RTO bots popped up in our Slack thing and said, hey assessors, guess what? Test student has just submitted an assignment. Go forth and assess it. Here's the link to the student's submission in SpeedGrader. And we can click that and boom, there it is. So you can see how much fun you can have with this. I'll leave it there. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any other ideas for what triggers and actions you'd like to see for Canvas LMS, or let us know about other educational software that you're using, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching. All the best with your Zaps.